Alright, Trekkies and Trekkers, time to take a look at the final episode of the day, which is The Ascent. There's a feeling of anticipation in Cisco's quarters as Jake makes final preparations for the for the move to his own quarters. Jake, along with Nog, who was due to spend his sophomore year on the station as part of his field studies, was discovers that the boys' quarters will not be next door but on the other side of the habitat ring. The old man reminisces, but Jake is all too eager to move out on his own. Meanwhile, Quark enters the room's quarters and his brother anxiously awaiting Nog's return. Despite his own disapproval of Nog's attending Starfleet Academy, Quark was brought several dozen bottles of root beer and discussed to see Rom at once gleefully drink one. The door chime rings and Rom grows excited, believing it might be his son, but instead it is Odo. The usual purpose of Rom between Quark and Odo turns serious and Odo announces he has come to arrest Quark once and for all. Whatever has happened, it looks like Quark's shady dealings have finally caught up with him. Rom continues to drink his root beer as his brother is led away by Odo. Along with Odo on board the runabout USS Rio Grande now, Quark grows increasingly bored and tries to find ways to pass the time, including him trying to get Odo to play Fizbin. While he's interested by Odo's reading a romance novel, Quark finds a constable willing to indulge him in a interrogate or tell him what has happened. One news for sure is that a Federation grand jury has indicted him for something big. Back over at Deep Space Nine, Nog makes Captain Sisko in his office to take orders. A symbolic moment involving Sisko's baseball, which Nog catches, epitomizes the boy's transition into a model cadet. When Nog promises to take care of Jake and keep him out of trouble, the captain sarcastically claims Nog inspires him with confidence. However, when Jake and Nog move to the quarters, it's clear things will not be quite the same. Nog seems to have become more disciplined, while Jake has been indulging himself, focusing on his writing. They are still best friends, but if Nog's 22 lights out time and 4:30 workout are any indication, the boys will not see eye to eye on everything. Their lack of conversation and other stealing has caused Quark's lobes to notice how knowingly filled with sound the runabout is. A particular claims that Odo, who was eating soup, smacks his lips when he eats. There's also a strange buzzing sound, although Odo does not hear it. A few seconds pass before Quark determines to find out what the sound is, and over Odo's impatience, he finds it is explosive underneath an access panel. Things go from bad to worse when they try to beam off the explosive off the ship, which causes it to explode and nearly destroy the ship. The Rio Grande limps to a nearby Class O planet, where they had to crash land because life support systems have been virtually destroyed. On the way down, Quark mentions the bomb was planted by the Orion Syndicate, to Odo's surprise. It seems lack of information about the charges against Quark was an attempt by Odo, who also knew nothing, to gain information. Both men lose consciousness during the violent crash. Quark awakens to find their situation grim. The Class O planet in which they have landed is freezing, while the weather is otherwise hospitable. The communications system in most of the planets were destroyed in the crash, and the local plants appear poisonous. They do have a couple of ration packs, but as Odo points out, they now have a choice between starving to death and freezing to death. On his first morning with Nog, Jake sleepily walks out of his bedroom to find his friend lifting weights. As usual, Jake passes on his own workout. Nog has found one of Jake's pads lying around with a story of past prologue on it, so Jake asks what he thought. However, Nog did not read for content, rather to correct grammar and spelling errors. Nog's having made the corrections himself is sacrilege to Jake as a writer. Nog doesn't seem to care. He claims Jake needs some muscles. Meanwhile, Quark has found a survival suit in the aft section of Rio Grande, which he plans to wear and a transceiver array, which they can use to send a distress call. As the communication system and signal booster have been destroyed, he uses his Ferengi brain to calculate that they will need to send the signal from somewhere less atmosphere, namely from the top of a nearby mountain. The pair begin their trek through the wilderness, conversing along the way. Quark believes Odo got what he wanted when his people made him a solid, and while Odo denies it, in a way he seems to know this is true. On the other hand, where he's still a changeling, Odo could have flown to the top of the mountain already. Quark trips on a rock, prompting concern from Odo. While Odo's concern is clear for Quark, he quickly changes it into concern for the transmitter. They agree to split the environmental jacket between them. Tension between Jake and Nog continues to mount. Nog comes home to find that, in the process of working on his story, Jake has left a mess in their quarters. and despite his schemes of working, Jake is playing computerized domjot to clear his mind to continue to write. Mom claims Jake wouldn't last a day at the academy, to which Jake retorts with a comparison of the Starfleet uniform to pajamas. Hope anyway declares that he's moving out. After 3 days of hiking, Quark and Odo are feeling the strain. If they take in turns wearing the regimental suit, between the hiking and the lack of beetles, Quark is about to collapse. Forcing his companion to push on, Odo assures him that they only have about 6 more hours to go. The speed changes considerably when they reach up at the hill they are climbing and find the mountain to be closer to 6 days away. They push on, but Quark reveals that he's not a member of the Orion Syndicate, as they do not kill their own. Odo realizes Quark was a witness, not a defendant, in the case. From this he surmises that Quark tried and failed to get into the Syndicate, which amuses him. However, Quark points out this means Odo has spent 10 years trying to catch a nobody. In the Rebel Mat, Rom joins Sisko. Discuss their sons living together. Each expresses his desire that his son would be more like the others. And Sisko finally remembers a time when the two were desperate to keep Jake and Nog away from each other. Rom reveals they thought Nog might be a changeling and, 8 hours earlier, had drawn some blood to make sure. He pulls out the vial to check again, that the blood hadn't turned back to the gelatinous changeling state. He also mentioned how Nog had put him on a report for having an untidy toolkit. Rom and Sisko read their sons coming a lot from each other. They start planning a way to get Jake and Nog to reconcile. As things become increasingly desperate, Quark wakes up after a night in the open to find he can no longer hear out of his right ear. He claims that his body has begun to shut down due to excessive stress and lack of food. Odo declares his end to push on, even if Quark is ready to give up, and Quark goes along, if only because he doesn't want to be left alone to die. The true feelings come out while they continue their journey, and they eventually start to express their hatred for one another. They start fighting and fall down a slope beneath the moment, breaking Odo's leg in the process. Forming a crude makeshift splint for Odo's leg, Quark determines to carry him to the top of the mountain. Though Odo tells Quark not to be an idiot, he tends to bring the other man along not to save him, but for food when Odo dies. The Ferengi continues to pull Odo using a travois, but eventually collapses, exhausted. Odo has to pull the transceiver himself while crawling on the ground. Quark, realizing that Odo was getting one up on him, and balking at the thought that Rom will hear at the bar, Nog will be completely corrupted by the Federation, become a Starfleet captain, and his remains will be sold if he dies on the mountain. Picks himself up and pushes on. Sisko surprises his son with the visit to inform Jake of some bad news. Station regulations say that a single person cannot occupy double quarters, and unfortunately, there are no other quarters available. The solution, of course, is to get Jake a roommate, so Sisko calls Nog in. Overhearing both ways' objections, is Jake's father, Nog's commanding officer. Sisko makes stay in the room together and leaves them alone. They both how foolish they have been and begin an attempt to reconcile. Jake suggests they go to the gym. Nog suggests domjot instead. As Quark collapses amid a snowstorm, Odo has realized that Ferengi couldn't carry on and begun dragging himself upward. Finally, he realizes his exercise of futility and records a log on his communicator. Begin recording. Chief of Security, log. Final entry. Looks like Quark didn't make it. Can't say I'm surprised. He'll find his body further up the slope. No doubt he'd want you to vacuum desiccate his remains and auction them off. Not that they're worth much. As for myself, cremate me. Stick my ashes in my bucket. Shoot me through the wormhole. Might as well end where it began. Or better yet. Owen's been off the service by the USS Defiant as he speaks and rushed to sickbay by Dr. Bashir. It seems the ship was looking for Odo and Quark and picked up the signal from the transceiver. Warren Dex informed him that they found Quark slumped over the emitter. Dex and Quark saved both their lives, to Odo's dismay. The two of them end up in the Defiant sickbay alongside one another, where they assure each other that they meant their words of hatred earlier. They're only apologizing and reassuring themselves that nothing has changed. Wow. So anyway, let's take a look at the production of this episode. The outdoor scenes for this episode were filmed on Mount Whitney, a 14,500-foot mountain in central California. The crew stayed in Lone Pine. Normally, Armin Shimmerman has no problems with the Quark prosthetics, but the shooting of this particular location proved different. When they arrived for the first day of shooting, the pressures of the Quark had become too much for Shimmerman and he nearly passed out. At first, their fears that the entire episode may have to be pulled, but the on-set medic had actually prepared for altitude reactions and was able to ensure that Sherman could shoot. According to Sherman, quote, "The medic's the hero of that episode," end quote. O's inquiry of how could it be so cold when the sun is shining was added on set because of excellent weather during production. Although it was supposed to be freezing cold on camera, in reality, the temperatures were high 65 degrees Fahrenheit, making shooting extremely uncomfortable for both Armin Shimmerman and Rene Auberjonois. To make it look colder than it actually was, director of photography Chris Kroscove used a very wide lens and a filter to give the film an icy look. In the evenings, he used a neutralizing filter to tone down the orangeness of the setting sun. While for the telecline transfer, Kroscove told the lab to keep the color spectrum towards blue to enhance the frigid tone he wanted. Rene Auberjonois enjoyed the location filming, commenting, quote, "That was because the men at night afterwards would have dinner hanging out together, which usually doesn't happen," end quote. And now finally, let's take a look at some trivia. This is the final episode to feature Starfleet uniforms originally created for the series that were introduced in the first season episode Emissary. For the next episode, Rapture onward, these are replaced by the new uniforms that were introduced in Star Trek First Contact. However, they will continue to be used for the duration of Star Trek Voyager, due to the US Voyager crew being stranded in the Delta Quadrant. The old DS9 uniforms were seen on Deep Space Nine 3 times more, in Purgatory's Shadow and by Inferno's Light, worn by Bashir, captured before the uniform change, and in the flashback scenes of What You Leave Behind. Quark offers to teach Odo to play Fizbin. The card was invented by James T. Kirk in A Piece of the Action. Jake Starr, the Nog proofreads in this episode, shares the same title as the series' second episode, Past Prologue. So, yeah. So, overall, I think this episode is kind of interesting, and yeah, just the fact that we get a Odo and Quark episode is just kind of interesting, and I'm also really happy that Jake and Nog are able to reconcile in this episode as well. So, yeah. So, overall, I give The Ascent 4 warp cores out of 5. Anyway, tune in tomorrow as we do the next episode, Rapture. So, until then, live long and prosper, everybody.